The number twos faced off in the vice presidential debate, but did it move the polling needle that's been permanently stuck on a dead heat for weeks? Or was the debate overshadowed by two enormous events, flooding of biblical proportions in the southeastern U.S. from Hurricane Helene and Iran bombing Tel Aviv, escalating an already perilous situation in the Middle East? Good evening and welcome to Talking Points. I'm Esme Murphy. Governor Tim Walz and Senator J.D. Vance had their moment in the national spotlight. And for Walz, it was a shaky start with a visibly nervous governor struggling on Mideast policy.
Getting its hostages back, fundamental, and ending the humanitarian crisis in Gaza.
Walz would do better with perhaps his strongest moment at the very end, pressing Vance on who he thinks won the 2020 presidential election.
Did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is a damning non-answer.
As for Senator J.D. Vance, he seemed to rise above his contentious, at times awkward moments on the campaign trail, appearing at ease and confident, like with this answer on abortion.
My party, we've got to do so much better of a job at earning the American people's trust back on this issue where they frankly just don't trust us.
And at times even empathetic after Walz disclosed his son Gus had witnessed a shooting at a St. Paul recreation center.
Tim, first of all, I didn't know that your 17-year-old witnessed a shooting. I'm sorry about that, and I hope that he's doing okay. Christ have mercy. It is awful.
Tonight we'll dissect the debate as well as the impacts of tumultuous events both here at home and abroad. Let's start with Professor Larry Jacobs. Well, joining us right now, Professor Larry Jacobs of the Humphrey School, University of Minnesota. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good to be with you.
All right, the debate, your reaction. Was this a nothing burger? Will this have a big impact? Will it move the needle?
You know, it was a much more subdued, cordial, amiable, Midwestern kind of exchange I think many of us were expecting. I think each candidate was able to promote the top of the ticket. But I don't know if this is going to move the needle much. There wasn't any kind of big breakthroughs, and there wasn't a clear winner in terms of performance or in terms of making a major point that would shift where we are right now.
J.D. Vance seemed to get a lot of attention for basically appearing to be not what he is on the campaign trail, which is extremely cordial, civil, a good discussion. What happened there, and why do people have this other impression of J.D. Vance?
Well, I think we're looking at J.D. Vance talking to different audiences. When he's on the campaign trail, he's talking to hardcore Republicans and Trump supporters. He lets loose with the red meat sort of, bloody shirt kind of statements that Donald Trump likes. But he was on national television, and I think the agenda was different. I think he was trying to rebuild and elevate his image to make it more favorable, more likable. We saw empathy, we saw a sense of humor, we saw the kind of traits that we tend to like. And I think that was a very deliberate strategy to try to rehabilitate himself with the larger audience of voters.
I always think that people who do better early in a long debate have an advantage. Certainly, Tim Walz was not that person. He appeared very nervous, especially with the first question on foreign policy and what was going on in the Middle East. He did, however, pick up steam, and I thought his high point was that answer or that Q&A about January 6th, and did J.D. Vance recognize the 2020 election? Does that still matter? Is that still relevant?
I think the discussion about democracy is an important one, and January 6th is an important issue. But that exchange came pretty well into the debate. You'd have to be someone with debate endurance to have made it that long, and a lot of people may have already drifted away. So I don't know if that had much of an impact. I do agree with you, though. Governor Walz started off shaky. He was stumbling over his words. He looked camera frozen.
Right. Let me ask you about the impact of two extraordinary events that have occurred within the past number of days. First is the unbelievable aftermath of Hurricane Helene, the devastation in states we weren't expecting it in places, especially North Carolina, also Georgia, and then also the escalation, the bombing of Tel Aviv by Iran. You said you didn't think that the debate was going to move the needle. Are these two incidents, do you think they have the potential, or are they going to move the needle?
I don't think the needle has much room to move because the supporters for Trump and for Harris are pretty locked in. But there is a 5, maybe 7% of folks who are up for grabs. And, I think for them, seeing stuff going wrong in the world, it's not good for the incumbent party. They tend to blame the people who have their hands on the levers of power. Now, the situation.
Are you talking about the flood or the war?
Well, both. I think the flood is just, it's a natural disaster, but very soon the questions are going to be, why are people still suffering? The answer to that is it was a massive, unprecedented natural disaster, and the federal and state officials are moving as fast as they can. But still, people are going to be in agony and dying for many days now. And that's not going to look good for Washington and the current group of people in power, which is Harris and Biden. Now, the Middle East, I think this adds to the narrative that Trump has been establishing, that the world is out of control, we're near World War III, and that Biden and Harris have not been able to really offer much security to Americans. The scenes with hundreds of missiles going back and forth between Iran and Lebanon and then against Israel, it's a terrifying view, and it's something that I think will unsettle Americans, particularly as Donald Trump pieces it together with the pattern.
Going back to the first point that you made about the response to this crisis in the southeastern United States, it almost seems, and there's already been back and forth about, has the response been not good? That's what Trump has been saying. Biden says yes. Even the Republican governor of Georgia is backing me. We've been all over it. It seems like with this scope of a disaster, no response is going to be enough. There's so much suffering, and the only person who really is going to get held accountable is the federal government. But will it slide more to Biden, or is it Biden-Harris?
Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are joined at the hips. And I think if the federal government and the Biden administration are blamed for the chaos and the continuing suffering from the hurricane, then it's going to hurt Harris. And so I think when Donald Trump jumps on the response by the federal government, says it's not enough, it's a damaging criticism. And for some Americans, particularly those who maybe haven't made up their minds, it could tilt them even further against Harris.
And just quickly, we're running out of time. Maybe I have blinders on and you forget past elections, but it just seems the extraordinary events that keep happening in this election keep happening, and we've got a good month left. Your thoughts about that?
This election has had so many twists and turns. I mean, just, the fact that we switched from Biden to Harris is itself, without historic precedent this late in the campaign. And then you get into these events, including the recent events with a historic, unprecedented hurricane, and then the war that's been bubbling and now appears to be really breaking into a crisis in the Middle East. This is just a very turbulent period. And if you're the incumbent or you're part of the incumbent party, you don't want to be part of that. You want serenity, you want calmness, you want Americans feeling safe, secure, and prosperous. I don't think Kamala Harris is getting that at the moment.
All right. Well, Larry Jacobs, always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Good to be with you.
Up next, a conversation with Democratic analyst Abu Amara and Republican analyst Amy Koch. Well, joining us right now is Amy Koch, Republican analyst, Abu Amara, Democratic analyst. The vice presidential debate is in the books. Was this a nothing burger?
Well, I would argue it's not a nothing burger. Overall, it may well be. I do think
it was pretty staid.
It was. Listen, I was amazed at that they did not mix it up at all. Right? First of all, I loved that it was more civil. There were some lovely moments where J.D. Vance and the governor actually shared a nice moment, and they were kind and respectful to each other. I like that. I do think they just didn't really trade back and forth debate much, and I expected more of that from these two. I thought there'd be more punching on issues, not at each other, but punching on issues that we didn't have.
Your thoughts?
Look, I do think, the first rule of vice presidential politics is to do no harm. And so in that way, I think both of them achieve their goals. I think they're really looking at the polling and the data and saying, hey, if we can slice off maybe 1% in Pennsylvania or 1.5% in Michigan or 2% in Wisconsin, and for those voters, temperament and being nice and being kind matters, I think they're chasing those voters.
For me, just watching it, not knowing a lot about J.D. Vance, except he's unpopular, all the ratings show that he's not doing well. He has trouble picking out donuts in a donut shop, which most people don't have a hard time doing, including myself. But I thought he came across as being charming, intelligent, gracious at times.
I agree.
I found myself saying, well, this is a nice guy. What's all the fuss about?
I agree. I think that Governor Walz did no harm. I think J.D. Vance scored well. His expectations, first of all, were low, right? They were low. I will give it that. But also, he hit it out of the park. From the first answer, where he introduced himself, he introduced America to him. He showed his personal side. No, it was do no harm for Governor Walz. I would agree. I think he was nervous at the beginning. We saw that. Clearly nervous. And I think he had some tougher moments than Vance. But Vance was clearly the stronger debater. But we know so much more about J.D. Vance after this debate, and he did more than do no harm.
Right.
He scored some real points.
Was it a home run out of the park, or was it more like a single or double?
I would argue it's more of a single or double. And in fact, I would argue Tim Walz scored some points as well. I think on some of the most important issues for Americans, on abortion, I thought he was strong, he was forceful, and he draw a clear contrast between the Republicans and the Democrats. And second, he got J.D. Vance to admit he wouldn't guarantee certifying the election results if he were to lose. And I think for voters, swing voters.
But that was towards the end. I just really wonder if people stayed with it.
Oh, remember, these debates are not just consumed in 90-minute segments. This is going to be spliced and diced and put on social media, and you're going to see J.D. Vance's answer on January 6th and whether he would certify the election. I suspect that's going to move some voters.
But those have been issues in the past that have been successful Democrats. They may play, but poll after poll is showing that the economy, that immigration, that those are the top issues that people are concerned about. And frankly, on those both, there's no arguing J.D. Vance hit a home run on them.
Right. Well, I think the expectations were so low. I just thought, well, this guy has such low ratings. Everybody says he's kind of mean or out there or whatever. I thought he came across incredibly well.
Well, the Trump campaign would do well to have him do endless interviews on every kind of media outlet that will have him.
Right.
Because he does a good job in this way. He's not great in the retail politics, is what we call it.
In terms of the debate, does it really make a difference, a vice presidential debate? I don't think it will.
So everything is different this year, right?
Yeah,
and we've never even paid attention to vice presidents beyond the first introduction at the campaign. I have to think really hard to think about Hillary's running mate, right? Tim Kaine.
Yep.
But I always have to think about it. In this case, I think people know about these vice presidential candidates, and they are following them. So to say it won't matter, I just think that's what in the past they have not. That doesn't necessarily hold true for 2024.
Here's what I would say. I think no one thing matters a lot, but a lot of things matter a little. And so I think this is the type of debate that will matter a little on the margins. Remember, Kamala Harris, I think everybody agrees, won the first debate. But if you look at the polling and where it trended, it did move about a point or so, but it wasn't a watershed moment, right? And so I expect this to be a split decision, whether you think J.D. Vance won the debate or not. I think that's a reasonable argument for folks to make. I don't think it's fundamentally going to change the polls moving towards November.
I sort of think that maybe Tim Walz could help Kamala Harris more than J.D. Vance can help Trump, only because Donald Trump is such an overwhelming personality, such an overwhelming figure in terms of his politics, his personality. I don't know. Your thoughts?
Well, maybe, but then there is also the age of Donald Trump.
That's true.
And so figuring in a younger VP candidate like this, I think that folks are going to be watching.
And he said how old he was.
Yes, he did.
He's not 40 years old.
And he clearly was very young and vital. There was just, that juxtaposition was also just, that's the advantage of being a 40-year-old, right?
Right. Well, your thoughts?
Well, I'm just going to say, I think Tim Walz is a retail politician. I think the Democrats are going to deploy him all across the swing states. Whereas if I were the Republicans, I would actually say, you know what, let's put J.D. Vance on TV, put him in town hall forums, put him in settings where he can communicate. Because it's clear to me that between Donald Trump and J.D. Vance is the superior communicator.
Although apparently Donald Trump is doing Fox News immediately after the debate and before the debate.
And that's the fundamental problem with that ticket, that no matter how good J.D. is, that Donald Trump is the son. and everything else revolves around it.
Well, JD described Donald Trump's policies far better than I have ever heard Donald Trump explain them. Right? He explained them with compassion. Yeah. He made them personal, and he explained them better than I've ever heard the former president explain.
All right. When we come back, we're going to talk about two huge things that have happened: the storm that has hit these southeastern states, the devastation there, and also the escalation of the war in the Middle East. Two surprises, perhaps October surprises, late September, October surprises. More with Amy and Abu after this. Well, we're back with Amy Koch and Abu Amara, Republican analysts, Democratic analysts, and we're talking about the two things now that have happened in the last few days that really have rocked this entire country. First is this storm, Hurricane Helene, which has devastated not just Florida, but Georgia and then North Carolina, just devastating. And then also we have this escalation of the war in the Middle East, very, very scary stuff. Let's talk about the damage from Hurricane Helene, because it's devastating. And already Donald Trump has tried to politicize it and say that the response has not been strong enough. Do you think that this hurricane and the horrendous damage is going to have any kind of impact on this election?
Well, I don't see how it can't. Happening when it's happening, no matter what the response is, Harris and Biden are going to be held responsible for it, right? They're going to be held for whatever the fallout is, and disaster relief never comes seemingly fast enough. You know, I think that Donald Trump would do well not to criticize, but to just show compassion and be in the arena and helping where he can.
Well,
that's
he's
what
already
I advise him.
criticized.
Of course he will, but it would do better to have him traveling, visiting, and uplifting people where he can.
Abu, isn't this going to be really troubling for Democrats? Georgia and North Carolina are two really important states that Kamala Harris might need, and she's pretty close there, or was pretty close there. I mean, what kind of impact do you think this could have?
Look, there's no question the impact of the hurricane. It is real. It is impacting tons of people all across the Southeast. But I will also say, with every crisis comes an opportunity. And I'm reminded of the 2012 campaign where Barack Obama was running for re-election, and there was a hurricane in New Jersey. And you saw him walking the Jersey shore with then Governor Chris Christie. And it allowed him to be elevated into a moment outside of politics, despite the fact that he was in a presidential campaign. And so the power of the incumbency actually allows you to have those moments in a way that the challenger does not.
Hurricane Sandy, that's right. I remember that.
That's right. I'm not sure Biden is up for that moment.
But Kamala will be, and that's the difference.
And we'll see. You know, there's also, and we've talked about this, that there's no knowing how what the impact will be of Republicans finally accepting and embracing that people want to vote differently, right? They want to vote early.
Right.
They want to vote absentee. It is a big deal.
Yeah.
And in the states hardest hit, these are swing states where 1 or 2 points could make the difference in this entire election. And the Republicans have now decided to move it in that way.
Right.
And in the middle of a disaster, people are not going to get to their polling places. They're not going to have the time.
They may not get to their polling places. I mean, I almost
they
wonder.
may not be able to vote early.
Yeah.
I wonder if, well, it's too early to talk about extensions and these kinds of things, but it's that devastating. But this issue of early voting, because Democrats have embraced it, and it's been great for them, just fabulous. Republicans have been saying, including Donald Trump, no, don't do it.
Talking it down.
This year, we are hearing Donald Trump say, vote early. We're hearing local officials like Lisa Damas, the state minority leader,
and
say
the GOP chair, David Hand.
Vote early. Are Republicans listening?
Yes, they are listening, and I've been saying it since 2020, so I'm very glad they're finally saying it. And I just think that because they did not run that playbook in 20, they did not run that playbook in 2022, I think it made a big difference for the Democrats to be on top of that. And I just think it's very difficult to know the impact that that's going to have now that Republicans are finally getting on top of that.
But do you think, can Republicans really catch up on this?
Look, that's exactly the point, right? Even though they've now decided they want to play the game, the Democrats are years ahead because we've invested in infrastructure that allows you to turn out those voters. This is not our first rodeo turning out folks with voting by mail. It basically is for the Republicans. And when you're talking about some of these purple states, oftentimes these Republican voters are in more rural areas. And so actually the vote by mail is more impactful for them than it is for the Democrats.
Right. And all we need is a couple points. And now we have a storm, a terrible storm.
Yeah. It's just unbelievable. And it just seems to be getting worse. I mean, as we discover more and more of the damage, it's just horrifying.
And the videos are devastating.
Also horrifying, the escalation of the war in the Middle East. It's almost 1 year to the day when it started with the raid, Hamas raid on Israelis. on October 7th. Obviously, this is escalating to a very serious situation, and this is going to be a real test. I noticed in the vice presidential debate, I thought Tim Walz seemed very uncomfortable being asked about foreign policy. That really stood out. He's not going to be the president. You know, if that ticket wins, he'll be the vice president. But when it comes to foreign policy, do you think who gets the edge here?
Well, I will say there's no question that this conflict is real. It's serious. It could, consequentially maybe be something like World War III. Here's what I will say, though. In the short term, I actually think it helps politically for the Democrats. Let me explain. We had been somewhat divided on the issue of Gaza and Israel. There's been an internal debate within the Democratic Party. There's been an internal debate within the Democratic Party. But Iran attacking Israel has really caused a level of consensus to say, wait a minute, if a country's attacked, it's obviously able to defend itself. And so you're starting to see some of those concerns being squashed, and there's a bit of consolidation happening with the Democrats. I think that's actually going to have an electoral benefit for Kamala Harris.
Your thoughts?
Oh, yeah, I think to say there's somewhat a divide in the Democrat Party on Gaza is like saying, the Grand Canyon is somewhat large of a hole. It is massive divide, and I think this is only going to exacerbate it. I also think that JD had a great line this evening when he said that, remember the 4 years of Trump, no major war, no major action happened under Donald Trump's 4 years, and they didn't. In the 40 years of his life, he said, I can't say that except for the 4 years of Donald Trump. And that's just a reality. And under the Biden-Harris administration, we've had Ukraine, we've had the horrible, horrible October 7th in Israel, and an ongoing, human rights crisis in Gaza. And all of that has happened, and now we've got Iran getting into the act.
But do people vote foreign policy?
They're not going to be voting foreign policy, and that's just not true. I think people remember when Trump was president, the Afghanistan withdrawal, the botch there. We had a once-in-a-century global pandemic.
Afghanistan withdrawal was Biden.
No.
That was absolutely
the planned withdrawal. The plan of the withdrawal.
It did happen under Biden,
but the planned withdrawal was planned by President Trump. But the simple point that I'm making is world events are always going to be happening, right? The fact of the matter is, unless we have troops abroad, overwhelmingly, the American people are not going to be voting on foreign policy. As you said earlier, they're going to be voting on the economy. They're going to be voting on abortion. They're going to be voting on the border. Those are the things that are going to overwhelmingly drive voters in this election.
Right, but when they feel insecure, when they feel that the world is at odds with each other, they will always gravitate towards Republicans because Republicans have traditionally been more hawkish and more strong on foreign policy.
We will all see very soon, won't we?
We will. 5 weeks.
We'll find out.
Abu Amara, Amy Koch, thank you so much. Great to talk to you as always.
Thanks for having us.
And that does it for this edition of Talking Points. As always, please email me with any comments or suggestions at esme@cbs.com. The show streams on our free streaming channel, CBS News Minnesota, on Wednesday and Thursday nights at 6:30 and 9:30 p.m. On Friday, the show posts to YouTube for on-demand viewing. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Esme Murphy, WCCO News.